Welcome, everybody. Welcome to ComSpark 2020. Obviously, a virtual session. I hope that you're getting used to working with the technology and getting a lot out of today's session. My name is John Connors. I'm a freelance writer and commentator with an interest and background in technology and the strategies that business deploy for digital transformation. I retired in 2016 as vice president with Cengage, a higher education company that helped transform education publishing into a focused technology enterprise. And today we're here to talk with Michael Fillios. Michael is the founder and CEO of IT Ally LLC, a leading IT and cyber advisory firm for small and medium-sized businesses. Michael is a four-time CIO, an entrepreneur, a senior global business and technology executive with over 25 years experience in transformation, change leadership, and operations management in the pharmaceutical sector, the industrial, automotive, banking, and consulting industries. His first book, Technical Debt 2.0, How to Future-Proof Your Small Business and Improve Your Tech Debt Bottom Line, was published by the IT Ally Institute in April of this year. In 2020, Michael formed the IT Ally Institute, a nonprofit organization that provides research, best practices, and thought leadership, and peer-to-peer programs specifically developed for small and mid-sized businesses. And with that, we'll begin the session. Michael, businesses are facing challenges in many, many different areas today. You focused on technical debt. Can you frame your concept of technical debt? Tell us what it means to SMBs, and why it's so important.
Sure. Thanks, Sean, for the introduction, and to ComSpark. I was just reflecting on this is my third year participating in ComSpark with being presenter on multiple occasions. So it's great to see the event back virtually in 2020. So as John mentioned, we wanted to take a fresh look at this concept of tech debt. And some of you might know that the term technical debt has been around for about 30 years. And it had a very limited but important definition with the context of software defects. So software developers would evaluate the amount of technical debt or defects that was residing in their code and would make deliberate decisions on rushing that product into market. With the understanding that they would go back and modify and correct those defects. So as I said, this is a definition that's been with us for nearly 3 decades. However, as we reflected on this, we felt that it was important to revisit this definition, especially given how technology has evolved over the past 30 years. As many of us, as John said, with that much experience, you've seen a lot of technology innovation. So we've seen migrations from the mainframe to client server, to the internet, to now the cloud and beyond. So coincidentally, we felt that it was important to refresh or revisit this definition of technical debt and put a more modern spin on it. So in today's version of it, which we call Tech Debt 2.0, we expand this definition greatly. Many of you, I'm sure, are in IT positions, whether you're in management or leadership roles or working to serve your various companies with different softwares and services, have probably experienced this firsthand. So in today's definition of 2.0, we are not just talking about it from a software development standpoint. We're talking about how tech debt can manifest in an organization, even through purchased software, through hardware, through data, processes, and all the way up into talent, as we've observed in our clients that potentially could have an impact on tech debt. So it was important for us to re-baseline this definition and certainly keep it more contemporary and keep it at pace with the technology evolution today.
Good. Michael, can a business recognize tech debt? Are there consistent symptoms that your research has shown up?
Sure. As we put some more definition around tech debt, we felt that we needed to define it a little bit further with respect to the types of tech debt that we are seeing in organizations and how it manifests. And so we came up with these three terms. And the first one here is unplanned. This is tech debt that is incurred due to an unexpected event. And the example we often give here is one where potentially you might have a hardware failure. So this is just something that might occur, and perhaps it could be also related to a cyber attack as a result of that hardware failure or other end-of-life technology. So it's something that you don't expect, it's unplanned, but certainly can impact your business. The second, and these get a little bit more stealthier as you go through the process, but certainly they get a little bit more harder to diagnose. Creeping, as an example, this is something that occurs gradually. And this can go somewhat unnoticed, as we say, because it can accumulate, just like debt can accumulate, it can accumulate over time. Some examples of this would include an organization perhaps, and I see some familiar names on the guest list here, folks that perhaps have had ERP systems highly customized over many years, and all of a sudden you realize that those ERPs that you purchased no longer act and function the way that they did when you bought them off the shelf. So this can limit potentially your ability to integrate with other systems or to be able to make changes to meet the dynamic needs of your customer base. So this is, again, a little bit more stealthier and something that can accumulate over the course of time. Now, we also wanted to talk about debt, and this is in the third example here. We talk about debt as intentional. Just like you would perhaps experience debt in your personal lives or in a business, not all debt is meant to be a bad thing. So in this case, we wanted to acknowledge the fact that organizations will take, deliberate decisions to defer perhaps investment that can create tech debt. So in this case, what the organization is doing is recognizing that they may have a particular, a hardware, or they may be deferring a project that ultimately may address that tech debt, but they're going to defer that. And they're going to recognize that it's something they'll have to come back to. Certainly, we've seen some of this occur as a result of our COVID times right now, where companies are a little bit more concerned about their business performance and maybe want to defer investments. This can be a double-edged sword for companies that are, quote unquote, kicking the can down the road and not addressing some of this debt that's been accumulated over time. So we do want to be mindful of all three of these tech debt, and each one of them can surface in different ways within your organization.
Michael, let's stick with intentional tech debt for the time being, now that you brought it up. Are there beneficial ways that a company can use tech debt to, gain competitive advantage?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, John, and it's one that we're still learning more about in terms of how companies confront this and use it as an advantage strategically. I mean, listen, fundamentally, as John mentioned, our business is geared towards small and mid-sized businesses. And it's not to say that these things don't occur in large enterprises. As John mentioned, I've been a Fortune 500 CIO, so I've seen this occur at a large scale. But we're really trying to get at here is those companies that perhaps don't have those plentiful resources, don't have perhaps all the talent and capabilities that large companies do, that really need to be thoughtful about each type of tech debt that they're going to incur. So for small businesses, intentional tech debt may be something that, again, there's a trade-off between them investing in expanding capital into their manufacturing plant versus putting in a new IT system. These are trade-offs, but at some point in time, companies are going to have to revisit that investment, and because it will accumulate, as we say, and catch up with you. So It's a good opportunity for small businesses and large to really understand the versions of tech debt that they have in their company and where they can use it strategically to make decisions that would help them modify or modernize, I should say, their technology versus those that they really want to contain and manage from a risk perspective.
Okay, Michael, good. Thank you. We've got a question from the audience. Doug Johnson is asking, what do you do with a company that has made customizations on their code for years for your company, and then they decide that they can no longer make changes for you? What do you do to still keep that product marketable?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Thank you for that. So certainly this would fit into the creeping category, where again, those decisions to customize that software product might have been intentional or perhaps not fully known or understood the implications long term that could occur with that particular platform. Quite frankly, we're seeing this quite a bit in a lot of our client work and in the research that we're doing at the IT Ally Institute. We are seeing examples of this where many of these companies now are reaching that point. Do they continue to invest in their legacy systems, or do they take advantage of some of the contemporary technology that exists today? For example, cloud-based software. Certainly, cloud-based SaaS applications have made it possible for small businesses to take advantage of world-class technology than ever before to sort of level the playing field against some of those large companies. So specifically, I would say to that question, it really is going to have to be looked at in terms of whether or not you want to continue to pay down or add to that debt, or is it time to service that debt? And it may be equivalent to making a balloon payment, if you're familiar with those financial terms, where you're kind of deferring those interest payments until they catch up with you. And at some point, you're going to have to write that check. A lot of it is going to be taking a look at the impact overall and how maybe it's hampering your ability to grow. We had a client who recently wasn't able to expand their business into new geographies and products because the 20-year-old custom system that they had was preventing them to be able to meet those market demands. We had to take a hard look at it and ultimately decided that it was time to retire that debt and move on and put our investments into something that would take us into the future. So it's always a difficult decision, but it's one that you've got to take the time, do the analysis, and really understand. But I would say inaction is also a decision here. So don't just sweep this under the proverbial rug. Make sure that you are addressing it head on and bring in some data to make an informed decision.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, Doug's question prompts me to remember something I heard in a session earlier today having to do with shadow IT. And it talked about how in many cases, if a company allows other functional areas within their organization to get into code development and do things like that, they can run into a situation where the people who do that code, who make those changes, who build those applications, all of a sudden leave the company, or they move on to other areas of responsibility. And how does that play into the tech debt equation, and how companies should look out for situations like that?
Sure. I mean, as an IT leader, I'm sure those of you that are in those roles understand the concept of shadow IT as John was describing it here. And this can be a topic probably for another day in and of itself, because we've seen lots of different ways that companies either embrace or fight the notion of shadow IT. The fact of the matter is it's a reality, and it's something that has certainly grown now more than ever, because with a credit card, we can go buy services in the cloud, and us as IT leaders may not even know that exists in our organization. What the example that you're providing, John, is one where you're sort of relying on other people to make good decisions that maybe aren't the best and experience technically or otherwise to make those decisions, and could be taking on risk. So I would say that there's probably some correlation between shadow IT, but more so I think what you're referring to there is on a talent side, which again is a part of Tech Debt 2.0, if you've got someone that's been the sole person in your organization that understands every single facet of a process or of a system, an architecture, or a product that's been developed, in some cases you would call that a key man risk. We often do a lot of work with companies on the due diligence side. So when we're going in to help a company buy another company, we often are the ones that are performing that due diligence. And one of the key areas of due diligence that we look at happens to be around key man risk. Once again, because these are smaller businesses, they tend to rely on a small group of people. In some cases, they're internal. In some cases, they're external, that have all the knowledge. And guess what? Not of that knowledge is not documented. It's not written down. So if these folks, Lord forbid, are no longer with us, they hit the lottery, and your business now is left to survive on its own, it could be another indirect form of tech debt, whether it's shadow or not. So it's just another area when you think about talent and tech debt, it needs to be comprehended.
Yeah, I could see how that would have severe impact on small and medium-sized businesses, especially. Michael, how about, to talk about creeping tech debt and unplanned tech debt? One of the difficulties I can see businesses encountering is recognizing that has crept up on your organization. What kind of symptoms can a CEO or CFO look at in their organization to recognize that that tech debt is having a negative impact on their business?
That's right, John. So as mentioned earlier, by definition, tech debt can manifest itself in many ways. And some of it is more obvious than others, and some of it's more intentional than others. We've compiled a list here. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but it gives you some sense of some of the areas that you can be looking at in your organization as to whether or not you have some underlying symptoms or root causes of tech debt that can be manifesting. Before I go into some of these on the list, the one that I really want to sort of bring this up to a business level conversation on is perhaps one of the first signs of tech debt is whether or not your underlying business performance is being impacted. So as a company, if you're not able to serve your customers' needs, or you're not able to support the growth, or you're not able to be as agile moving into new markets, potentially there can be some underlying symptoms of tech debt that you want to explore a little bit further. A few of the others that we mentioned here, and again, I'm speaking to some of the IT leaders perhaps on the presentation. Many of us work really, really hard to make sure that our investments are balanced in IT, such that we're not just spending a preponderance of our investment on keeping the lights on, or spending it on legacy IT as a major component of our budget. Those systems, of course, if they are highly customized, may need a lot of time and attention to be able to maintain. So if you are spending a significant amount of your IT investment on legacy or on keeping the lights on, it's very possible that there could be some underlying symptoms of tech debt there. Another example that we tend to look at here is around project execution, and whether or not you're able to execute your projects on time and on budget. And of course, this can be derived from a lot of different things, but in one area, we look at it in the standpoint of project execution, such that perhaps you're not able to move those projects through your life cycle fast enough, and there could be some underlying symptoms there of tech debt causing that to be the case. Perhaps it's those systems, again, that are limited, and you're having to spend more time to get them to a ready state. Or in some cases, maybe you just don't have processes documented or requirements defined well enough that can cause some issues here. A third one that I will just call out as well, which has been highlighted here at ComSpark this year, which is a topic on many minds, is around data. You may not be thinking about data as in the same breath of tech debt, but as many of you probably have experienced, lots of organizations now are creating lots of data, but don't always have the best ways to optimize that data, particularly for decision making and particularly for ease of use and access. So we see this time and time again, that some of the underlying symptoms here that may be causing your inability to get access to data for insights could be a result of some tech debt. And it could be the fact that you don't have the appropriate disciplines in place to manage your data in a consistent way. So you have the so-called multiple versions of the truth. It could mean that you don't have the ability to harvest that data out of your systems. It could mean that you don't have the appropriate mechanisms to provide access to that data anytime, anywhere, any device. So data has become much more important on all of our agendas, and in many cases we are seeing it be impacted as a result of tech debt in this context. Those are just a few examples. There's many others here, and we speak a lot about these in the book as well.
Yeah, that's a big help, Michael. Thank you. Let me just remind people in the audience that if you have questions, you can use the chat function to just let me know what those questions are, and I'll bring them up in the context of the presentation. Now, to get back to Michael and the book. Michael, one of the things that you discuss in the book is the Tech Debt 2.0 diagnostic tool. Can you talk a little bit about that and how a business might use the diagnostic tool to help manage technical debt?
Thanks, John. I'd be happy to. So this is something that we've thought a lot about, and we recognize that if we're going to expand the definition in the way that we did, beyond just software defects, not only did we need to put some context around that definition, we also felt it was important that we had to provide some tools to help organizations really assess and understand the potential root causes of tech debt in their organizations. And when I was, conceiving this and talking with some of our team, I wanted to find a relevant way of describing this that most people would be familiar with, especially perhaps younger young adults that are just beginning to start their lives in established credit. You might be familiar with the concept of a FICO score. So basically, we took that concept of a FICO score, which measures the overall wealth associated with your payments and your managing of your payments from an overall debt perspective. So it's basically your credit worthiness is another way of saying it. Well, we took the same scores and we created this tech debt diagnostic that looks across 54 different areas that examines potential root causes within your organization. And then based on those ratings, which are derived through a self-assessment and importance, we're able to develop a score associated with your organization that mirrors what you would see from a FICO perspective. So if you're familiar with FICO, your credit rating is either poor, fair, good, or excellent. You get a numerical score. In this case, we're not using the same scale that they use on FICO, but you get the gist of it. So as an example, you're seeing a score here on this particular case on the dial of 62. 62 fits within the good range. So what does this mean? It means that tech debt is being proactively managed jointly by the business and IT, and shows little or no negative impact on business performance. So our stipulation here is that you're in a good place. You're working at it. You still have some room to improve. But conversely, where we see a lot of our clients and through our research falling into the poor level or the fair area, where tech debt is certainly reactively managed. So going back to the unplanned, something breaks and we go fix it. That's an example of reactively managed by IT and could have significant impact on your business performance. That's not our goal here, of course, as an organization. As you move up the scale, fair, you're starting to address some of those, and you have a mix of reactive and proactive. It's still being led by IT, and there could be some signs of negative impact on your business performance. Ultimately, just like any of these, you get certain benefits as a result. So on the excellent rating, which is a score between 80 and 100, what we see here is tech debt is proactively being managed jointly by the business and IT. So this is no longer just an IT issue. This is something that the business is also playing an active role in. And they're looking at it from a focus of innovation and customer experience while maintaining operational excellence. So they're being very thoughtful. They're not just looking at this as a cost reduction. They're looking at managing tech debt for differentiation. One example that we see this, I mentioned the due diligence side. As a result of our due diligence projects, we deploy this diagnostic when evaluating a potential company that we're going to buy. And as a part of it, what we do is that if this score comes out very low, we wind up having a discussion with the potential buyer around how that impacts the overall valuation of that company. So for example, if you have a poor or fair score, something below 50, 59 in this case, there's a potential here that you've underinvested in IT. So that acquiring company might have to make some investments post-acquisition. So if you follow what I'm saying here, the impact of tech debt and this diagnostic can provide some leading indicators as to whether or not you're underpaying or overpaying for a company, given some of those root causes. And we find this is pretty insightful data to have, especially in a transaction like that. So we do have a free offering of this assessment that we provide in the book. And you can get access to that through the code that's available in the book itself. And you can get to this diagnostic and run those reports and use it for your own companies or for your clients, and give you some greater insights into how they are doing with respect to tech debt.
Well, Michael, that's excellent. I can see how a business could use tech debt very much to monitor and manage the concept within their own organization. Talk a little bit about benchmarking and how the tool could also be used cross sectors and within similar companies or different companies to kind of evaluate yourself in comparison with other organizations.
Sure. Well, we're in the early stages of that, John, and certainly through the IT Ally Institute, which essentially was created to promulgate this research and thought leadership and collect some of that data. So we are in the process right now of collecting all of this data so that we will be in a position to begin to look at it and compare against industries and weights, size of companies, and other characteristics. We know it's important to be able to compare and contrast, and this is something that we're doing sort of rather informally today. But through the research agenda and the Institute, we'll be able to share more of that as time goes on. Just like any benchmarks that you've used to look at either IT spend or other factors, it shouldn't be done in isolation. It's certainly something that provides context. But there's other factors, of course, that need to be considered when you are looking at these overall scores. But stay tuned on that one. We'll have more to share, hopefully, as the Institute matures further.
Good, Michael. Let's get back to mergers and acquisitions for a minute. You've mentioned the concept of tech debt as it applies to merger and acquisition situations. What about the role of a buyer looking at a company? Can you talk about some of the due diligence steps that company might take to ferret out tech debt within a company they might be targeting for acquisition?
Absolutely. So I know some of you on the presentation here perhaps do this for a living. But when you're, conducting due diligence, there's a number of different things that you want to do to get a full understanding of the organization and whether or not there potentially is a risk associated with it. Because a lot of the due diligence really comes down to risk, and there's different types of risk: operational risk, customer risk, financial risk, and so on. So when we are looking at risk from a tech debt perspective, I touched upon this earlier, it may mean that we are looking at it from a technology perspective. So what does their infrastructure look like? How have they made investments to keep that infrastructure refreshed, and potentially looking at it from that standpoint. We'll look at it from a cybersecurity standpoint, potentially looking at ways that we can understand whether or not the company is prone to risk from an overall cybersecurity perspective. We talked about the talent side, so this is key. A lot of the companies we deal with have that key man risk, and this is something that we want to be very thoughtful about. We can look at their total IT spend, which is another area that we'll always look at and determine whether or not they have a good understanding of their spend, which is sometimes a challenge, but how are they allocating those investments over the course of a 3-year plan, let's say. We'll look at documentation. We'll look at any kind of evidence that might help us with understanding whether or not this company is prone to tech debt. And of course, deploying the diagnostic will give us some additional data as we collect that across these 54 areas. It really does help us in understanding the true picture in a broader capacity. At the end of the day, IT is only one component of a due diligence process. There's a lot more that gets done when you're buying a company. So it does need to be put in consideration with everything else, especially given the complexity. It always comes back to the company strategy and what they're trying to accomplish, John, as well. So if it's a company that's looking to grow via acquisitions, certainly you want to make sure that your technology infrastructure is going to enable that. And you want to be able to integrate those companies faster so you can get the value that you desire from those integrations. So again, context is important when you do due diligence in our minds, and certainly it's looking at evidence, it's looking at data, it's looking at these sort of sources of tech debt, and all of that, along with the interviews that we conduct, really does help us to give us a clearer picture.
Good. Thank you, Michael. Let's come back to small, medium-sized businesses and some of the issues that are particularly relevant to them. One of the things that the book talks about is the rapid changes and advances in technology. Now, thinking about SMBs, can you talk about some of those technology advances, some of the new emerging trends in technology that might allow an SMB to sidestep and avoid incurring technical debt? I know one of the things the book mentions is extending the enterprise and using outside resources. Can you comment on that? Talk a little bit about that?
For sure. So look, I mean, one of the things that we pride ourselves on at IT Ally is that we are business owners, so therefore we think like owners. So when we're engaging with our clients, we bring that perspective, recognizing that again, for small businesses in particular, there's always going to be some constraints that they have where they don't have a blank check. So making the right bets and making the right technology choices is super important for them to understand those investments clearly. And in today's modern era, there's lots of choices out there for these companies to make. You talked about leapfrogging and whether or not a company that's saddled by legacy technology can now move into the cloud and benefit from an ERP or a CRM system. I mean, again, those are things that are very likely cases and scenarios that we see time and time again. It's then a question of which system or platform is best for you, which is really where the heavy lifting comes into play, to understand what requirements, what are you really trying to accomplish as a business. So these are decisions that, again, you can't make in a vacuum. You certainly can't just make as an IT organization. So I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here that this is important, that you get your business leadership involved. Everybody is clear and understands sort of what we're trying to achieve as a business, and then we can go and vet the appropriate technologies. But you think about artificial intelligence, you think about robotics, process automation, some of those topics that are being talked about here at the conference. You think about data analytics and others, that now these technologies and wonderful innovations are accessible and available to the small businesses. They have a different issue. They don't know how to apply those perhaps to their business. So this is no longer about technology innovation. And we know that technology innovation is strong. It's a question of how do we determine the right use cases for those technologies that are going to best achieve our business outcomes. And that to me is where you find sometimes, at least in the small businesses, where they need some help. They might read about a particular technology, or they might be understanding the cloud, but they don't quite fully understand the benefits of those technologies and how they can be applied to solve some of their challenges. Big topic right now is customer experience. Many different technologies out there that can help improve the customer experience. And this is something that many companies are looking at, as well as different channels that they sell their products as more moving towards e-commerce, given the growth of e-commerce that we've seen through COVID. So no shortage of topics, no shortage of technology. And ultimately, I think it's a matter of the fundamentals, understanding how that technology can achieve your business objective, and then doing the due diligence to make sure you make the right decision.
Good. Thank you, Michael. Beginning to move on to the end of the session, but one of the things I'd like to talk a little bit about is the COVID pandemic and the impact that has had on small and medium-sized businesses. Tech debt is a concept that exists with these businesses before the pandemic and after the pandemic. But what impact has the pandemic had as far as tech debt and the changes that it has forced these businesses to confront?
Yeah, I think we kind of talk about it as a good news, bad news story, or a double-edged sword, whatever analogy you want to use. And what I mean by that, in some cases, as an IT leader, you've been asked to step into the forefront and take on challenges that you didn't have before, and support mass movement of your employees to work from home, and having to get them set up safely and secured and trained out of their work from anywhere environments. So that certainly posed a challenge to some organizations that weren't prepared, whether it be they didn't have the policies in place, or didn't have the physical hardware, or found that those users weren't trained adequately. So that can be viewed as a negative thing. However, this has also sort of accelerated the adoption of technology much faster. So many of the companies and leaders we talked to through the Institute and through our roundtables spoke about the fact that they might have had, you pick the technology platform, Microsoft Teams or Zoom or you name it, but it wasn't adopted widely. And COVID sort of accelerated the adoption just out of pure necessity. Companies needed to move quickly, and they needed to use those technology platforms, so it was an opportunity for them to accelerate that adoption. I think that's a great example. Now, what I would say for IT leaders and their impact, and that what sort of prompted us to develop this playbook that you're seeing on the screen here, I forget who said it, but many people have never waste a good crisis. And clearly we're in a mode where we're still dealing with this crisis at multiple levels. But from an IT leader's perspective, you can think about it as a way to go on offense, and there's also a way for you to stay on defense. And what we're saying here is both are important, so play both sides of the ball. First and foremost, on the offensive side, you need to sort of look at and many of you now have been dealing with this for 6 months, so this may be old news or you've accomplished some of these things, but certainly not to mention staying healthy and trying to protect your family and your health as your business needs you. Aside from that, I would call it sort of an extreme prioritization that companies are going through right now to make sure that any of those investments that you're executing on are the most important ones for your business as it relates to your survival. And it could be a very acute plan that we talk about developing here that gets into what does that look like over the next 30, 60, 90, 120 days. It's probably very hard to go look beyond that given the changing world that we're in. But it's all about focus. It's all about being very deliberate, doing a check around your overall project portfolio health, reprioritizing backlog, and making sure that wherever you are investing, it's meeting certain objectives such as revenue preservation, customer experience, things that are really important to your business counterparts. So we see this as an opportunity for IT to sort of lean in heavily into this conversation and really, advance the business. Conversely, on the defensive side, You know, as an IT leader, you never really want to be in a position where you can't certainly articulate potential risks that you might be undertaking in your organization. So one of the areas that we talk about here is take stock and really understand, where do you believe you have risks in your business, and do that from a business impact perspective. In other words, talk about risks in the ways that business owners are going to understand what they mean. We have a lot of jargon we use in IT and cyber, and sometimes it's very difficult to navigate through those conversations, especially if you're a business stakeholder. So I think it's really important that you take stock of your risks, really understand them, including your tech debt, and set a plan and begin to address some of those root causes. So you use this as an opportunity to go aggressively at addressing some of this tech debt. Potentially, you might have been deferring an investment for years or months. Maybe this is the time to address it. Sounds counterintuitive because you're probably being very cost conscious, but at the same time, you've got to weigh that out against risk. The other thing, extended enterprise wise, as John alluded to, is that, you know, don't just think of your sort of responsibilities within your four walls. We know, and certainly ComSpark is well attended by many awesome partners and providers inside the local market here and globally. Now's the time to really deepen those relationships with those partners. I know as a CIO in Fortune 500, I relied heavily on my partners for all kinds of things that I know we couldn't do internally. And, you know, there's nothing better than having a strong partner that, you know, you can trust and is going to be there for you to help you identify potential areas of cost savings or help you optimize technology that you currently own, so on and so forth. There's a lot of talent in the marketplace that can be available on a fractional basis, which is what we do at times, where you can't maybe, it doesn't make sense to hire that talent full time. You don't need it full time, but certainly you want to take advantage of the knowledge and life experience that they have. So, you know, find the right balance for you. We think this is a unique opportunity for IT to impact your organization. And I know many of you are doing that because I talk to many of you. So just continue doing what you're doing and look for those areas where you can engage more heavily and be prepared as best as you can.
That's great advice, Michael. Michael, as we begin to wrap up, we have time for one more question that's come in from the audience. Dilip asks the following. How do you see IT companies post-COVID-19? Do you see a permanent change? Also, would you foresee a significant difference in the future state between a true IT company, for example, Microsoft or Google, versus a business organization with an IT ancillary function?
Hey, Dilip, thanks for your question. I got to think about that one a little bit. There's a couple of questions I want to unpack in there. I'll start with the back end of the question, which I think hits to something that close to home for me, is that being involved in technology for the past 30 years, we used to talk about it as convergence. You know, it's very hard to separate IT and the business. And those of you that either have, you know, worked for me or been a part of the organizations that I've led, this is something that I've always espoused in terms of it's very difficult to separate business and IT. And I'd often don't want to look at them that way, recognizing, of course, there's separate functions and whatnot. So when you think about business outcomes and technology companies, I think it's extremely important that technology companies begin to position themselves as much as they can towards the outcomes that they're trying to achieve from a business perspective. I've also known, being a buyer of technology, even being in the IT space, it's extremely complicated out there. So how do you really navigate through all of this? And imagine if you're a CFO of a $300 million company that's responsible for IT, and you're trying to figure out, you know, what the true value is from these investments that you're making. So I do think there's going to be a reset, and companies are going to begin to think more about, and many of them are doing it today, on how do they link technology to business outcomes and begin to work in that intersection where there's no longer sort of the, divided lines. These are much more blurred lines in terms of how technology and business come together to solve a particular problem. I'm hard pressed to think about many business issues that we see from our clients that don't involve technology anymore. I mean, just about everything touches technology, and that's going to continue with the rapid pace of innovation. So So I'm not sure, Dilip, if that's getting to all of your question there. I do think that organizations, when they go through a crisis like this, will reinvent themselves. We'll take a look at a hard look in the mirror and determine how they need to change. This is an opportunity, of course, even though it's been brought on by a crisis, to bring some of that perspective back. Having been through, personally, let's say, having been through companies that have gone through bankruptcy was one of the most eye-opening experiences for me, because when a company's going through bankruptcy, boy, you've got to make some tough decisions. And the burn to furniture concept, that's where it comes from. So, force yourself really outside of your comfort zone. Think about these constraints you have and turn them into opportunities, and redefine those working relationships, whether it's within your own company or with your partners. It's a great opportunity, I think, to advance those in many ways through this process.
Well, thanks, Michael. That was a great response. And we wrap up. I'd like to thank the audience for their participation. Michael, thank you. And I hope that we get to see perhaps more books in the future.
We appreciate that. For the one thing I want to mention here, and I know we're going to be getting a list of the attendees, but I did want to thank everybody for attending this session. And as a way of our gratitude to you, we are giving you a free copy of our ebook. There's a coupon code that you can use to purchase that book on BookBaby. And if you can't grab the information here through this slide, we'll make sure that anyone that attended this session will get access to that free download of the ebook as well. So, and if you need more information, certainly hit me up on LinkedIn. If we're not connected, of course, send me an email directly or reach out to us on the Institute. I certainly have enjoyed our time today. It always goes by quick, but I'll be hanging around here at the booth for the remainder of the session. So if anybody wants to stop by and say hello, happy to do that, or continue the discussion. But thank you very much, John, for your always awesome moderation. And we'll hopefully see you all soon, and stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll see you at the booth. Take care now.